Greetings, magical mages and spiritual sages. Welcome to the Age of the Mage podcast. We are on episode 56, and we just are approaching our springtime in many parts of the world. And I believe this time of year reminds us of positive energies like rebirth and hope and moving forward, and the sun coming out after a long winter, trees moving into blossoms, and we're approaching warm days, and um, all this kind of new growth. This is all carried in the energies of springtime. And yet, at the same time, with all these beautiful, wonderful parts of our world opening up and receiving the energies from the sun and beginning to reemerge after the winter months, we still have issues in our world, don't we, that might be discouraging, might be reminding us of darker times and the kinds of energies that work against these bright and light and hopeful, happy, joyous energies. And we've been talking quite a bit about all kinds of different ways to use our magic. We've been going over the magical archetypes. There's 9 of those, and we'll be finishing that up shortly. And we've been exploring different types of ways we can use magic, and if we want to dedicate our lives to magic and spirit and working with our souls at deeper levels than just this 3D surface level. We've been talking about all these issues. And we've also discussed the timelines and some of these world energies that are upon us and how we seem to be diverging. And at a point of choice for many of us where the human race may be making a very important choice of what timeline to merge onto. Timelines that support freedom or timelines that produce more enslavement. And these are very big and major choices. And we're seeing the pressure that comes with those kinds of times, those pivotal points in our space-time continuum. We see that pressure building and intensity all around the world. That is forcing each one of us to reevaluate some of our beliefs and see where we stand and make a choice and take a stand. So there's a lot of things going on right now. And I know that each of you are feeling all these types of energies in your own way. We are surrounded and connected by an etheric network. And we feel each other, even though we don't know it, even though we're not sensing that as something that's always happening. It is always happening. And it's a constant part of our lives. And we might more closely feel those that we live with. We may be more sensitive to those energies and emotions that are directly in front of us and confronting us that way. But we're part of this global network too. We're part of a massive system. And the more empathic or telepathic we are, we're also open to dimensional activity, interdimensional activity, and concepts and energies too. So there's just a lot going on. And I'm sure it always is. I'm sure this very complex existence of ours is always full of so many aspects. But many of us are aware right now at a conscious level that there seem to be additional pressures, additional things happening. And maybe this is because of a shift that our entire earth is going through and is making. Many call this, there's words like ascension to describe this, or moving from the 3D to the 5D, moving into various different frequencies. So there's lots of ways to think about this and why we might be feeling more intensity around some of these issues at this time. So today I wanted to address something that we're probably all thinking. We go up and down. Sometimes we're very hopeful and happy and joyous, and other times we kind of sink down and we think, what's the use? what, where are we headed, and how can I help? I don't know that I can help. And so we go into those kinds of feelings too, don't we? Does our magic work? I know that those of you listening are interested in magic, spirit, and soul. I know that you all have individual ways of utilizing energies that can't always be seen with one, or felt, or taste, or smelled with one of these five senses. You're interested in those extrasensory perceptions and the multitude of dimensions that exist and how those connect with us. And so I call all of that magic. And I know you're interested in that if you're listening. I know this is something we share. But even though we feel a great belief and an affinity for these things, sometimes we can find ourselves questioning, can't we? Like, oh my goodness, is this really going to work? Do we really have some power behind us? Whether that's a question about your own life, or whether that's a question about how you could serve in a larger way, perhaps a community, family service, friendship groups, teams. We ask ourselves these questions. Will our magic have any real effects? Am I wasting my time? All right, so I wanted to address some of these conflicting feelings we have, these joyous moments and full of belief and full of, we're ready to surge forward, and we can feel the magic down to our bones. And then those times where we lose hope and we sink a little bit and we just don't know. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's definitely real. Definitely. Your magic is real. Your souls are real, and they are connected to invisible parts of you that are so massive and so expansive that this little existence we each feel, this small incarnation that we're each aware of about ourselves, that's the tip of the iceberg. It's just a smidgen of who you are. It's a representation for a point in space and time. And it's the same with our world. We're kind of the microcosm here, and that world is our macrocosm. We're also, our reality that we see is also the tip of the iceberg. Much of our reality is illusory. It's representational. It's a hologram of something bigger and deeper and more and true and more real. And so not only are we dealing in this kind of smaller portion of ourselves very often in our 3D world, we're also looking at a reality, viewing a world that's only partial, that is not as holistic as it truly is. We don't see that, we don't perceive that unless we call on out the other parts of ourselves that can connect with those other parts of the reality and of the world and of our current dimension. It's real. It's very real. So what I wanted to do today is just go over a few of these things that might be getting us down and remind us of how we could offset some of those things using this very real soul power, this very real spirit that makes our bodies run, that gives us juice, that gives us life. Of course, we depend on our bodies and our blood and our organs, but none of that's any good without this spirit filling up the body, is it? And that's what we are concentrating on when we come together and listen to these podcasts and do other kinds of research and work our own magic in our own lives. That's what's uniting us. Are these unseen realms, these unseen powers, this invisible network, all these types of things. That's where we are residing, those parts of us that we don't always see. That's the part we're sharing with each other. And that's the part where we can have great effect on our world. Because as magicians, as spiritual workers, as starseeds, as galactics, as all kinds of different beings, we know that very often reality starts in etheric realms. Reality trickles down and firms up as it moves from etheric down to astral, down to 3D. So what we do in these etheric realms has great effect upon our physical and 3D world. And we don't want to forget that. We don't want to let the loss of hope or discouragement take that belief away from us, because then we will not do what we came to do. We have to be responsible for continuing to practice and continuing to work with our magical selves, with those parts of us that can work in the spiritual realms. Because that's where we're going to have our effects. Let's look at one issue: lies. Lies and deception. They're all around right now, aren't they? Some are intentional, some are unintentional. Some of our best friends are unintentionally um, taking part and spreading deception because they have observed a story, a narrative, and have accepted that narrative into their belief systems and are sharing it with others. We're seeing this. So lies and deception, these are forms of fraud. These are forms of darkness. These are things aimed to lower our frequencies and vibrations. So they're quite damaging, really. And they're all around right now. They're coming out because the energy that is behind those things is trying to stop the polarized energy of truth. Truth is trying to emerge. It is coming into the light more so than in many, many, many hundreds of years. Thanks to all kinds of moving parts coming together, technology and world communications, and different frequencies coming into our atmosphere to help us wake up as a people. All kinds of things are happening to promote and start to receive truth that has been hidden from us. And so, of course, the opposing forces, the opposing energy of keeping things in the dark is rising up too, and we're seeing that. All right, let's look at divisions. We've got a lot of divisions going on. We see a lot of some subtle and some not so subtle. We receive a lot of messages right now from various forms of media that we shouldn't like those people over there, or we shouldn't like that idea over there. No, that's wrong. This is over here. This little portion, this is the truth. And these are the only people you should like. These are the only ideas you should accept. Not over there, not those. And this type of messaging encourage us to divide ourselves, to separate ourselves from each other. Now, there may have to be some lawful separations that we see in the coming days, because there is such a thing as separation and division that comes with alignment. Because as I align to something and someone else aligns to something else, that may separate us. If those two ideas are very far apart and cannot exist together, then just the fact that we are each aligning to a different timeline, a different idea, could separate us. So there is room to accept the idea of lawful division, lawful separation, as it is, if it is brought about by personal choice, if it is brought about by critical thinking and true resonance and destiny and soul journeying. If these are what lead us to align with certain paths that may take us on a different journey than someone else and therefore separate us, it's okay. That's all right, because that's part of life, that's part of diversity, that's part of vibrancy, that's part of growth, that's part of birth. And that it's like a tree or a seed that comes up from the world and of course branches out, doesn't it? But we do not have to be encouraged to withdraw our love from others who may choose a different path. We do not have to pour energy into the concept of division. We can give energy into those things we're truly enjoying, and into those things we find joyful, those things we find creative, and those things we find to be positive. And if that division occurs, as we're doing that, so be it. Then it is a natural law. Then it is a very acceptable way of moving into division without creating negativity around that division. But we do see right now, unfortunately, this rise in negative division. Let's look at another thing we are all seeing, we're perceiving, we might be experiencing, and that is the invasion or kind of pushing down freedoms, individual freedoms, things that we may have been taking for granted. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We've lived in many countries around the world. We have lived with the feeling that we have these things. If we want to express ideas, opinions, and we want to go online with those, that's been supported. We've been allowed to share our ideas, no matter how different they may be from someone else's. We have enjoyed a world where we've been allowed to travel quite freely and exchange with others in very free ways. And we see this being curtailed. So we have to start asking, is this legitimate? Is this valid? Is this where we want to go? Do we want less freedom or more? Or at least sustain healthy versions of freedom? Where do we want to go with this? And many are troubled because we might be able to see patterns emerging that do not support freedom. Instead, are supporting things that would confine, constrain, or even enslave. And many do not want to go in that direction. And so we're facing that issue too, aren't we? We're looking at another issue, and that is personal sovereignty. It's slightly different from freedoms. Freedoms are expansive and can be applied, worldwide, could be applied as principles that we're born with and that we believe we are entitled to have. Now, personal sovereignty or even national sovereignty, these are slightly separate. These include boundaries. These include the right to set up healthy boundaries. So, for example, we believe that each person should have the right to their personal space. They should have the right to believe as they want to. They should have the right to live in safety and security. And if someone comes along and wants to abuse them, either in a physical way or emotionally, or psychologically, we don't like this when we see this happening. If we observe that happening, we don't, something rubs us wrong about this, because what's happening is we're watching someone's personal space be invaded. We're watching them be robbed of their natural born gift that we believe they should have, sovereignty. So sovereignty involves boundaries. And this is where you can start refining ideas of freedom. This is where we might say, all right, this person owns their own business. They have their right to establish boundaries for that business. They own it. It is theirs. It is an extension of them. And so they have this right to fill up that space with whatever they choose. And they also can set rules and limitations on who can come into that space, because it is a personal space. It's an extension of a personal space. And we see these kinds of questions popping up in personal lives right now with things that some of us do not want to have invade our space. Suggestions of that becoming okay, right? And that's not okay. And then we also see that even on large scales, with so much talk about boundaries and borders, don't we? It's got to come to light so that each one of us can review our thoughts about these things and see where we truly align with these issues. And because in the doing of that, we will merge onto the appropriate timeline for ourselves. So all these various things are happening, and each one of these kind of darker pressures or darker issues that we're seeing and we're facing, they all have something in common, and that is that they tend to lower our vibrations. They tend to lower or interfere with our frequencies. We may want to raise those frequencies. We may want to learn more, expand more into our soul work, into our destinies, into our spirit, into our magical workings, practice, and connections. And if these things that are coming around us or onto us, if they get too much momentum, if they get too much access to us, they can actually interfere with our ability to emerge into the person we're meant to become. So they all have that in common. But the message for today is that we have the tools, absolutely have the tools, to combat these things with magic, with spiritual techniques and principles. And when we do these things, we will not only be able to resolve the dissonance in our own personal spheres concerning these things, but we can cause effects to spread out from us. We can have direct effects on much larger scales than we might imagine right now, than we have been told we could have. All right? We know that if you do your own research and you use your extrasensory perception of discernment and of intuition and of feelings, that you can move on a journey towards truth. This is open to every one of us if we allow that. And that's part of our spirit. That's part of our soul talking to us. So there's one example of how something we might not ordinarily call magic actually is. It's part of the spirit. It's part of the soul. It's part of that invisible world. And it can have a direct effect on lies because it can start shining light on lies and it can start aligning us with truth. All right, let's look at divisions. We're going to be talking soon about one of the magical archetypes that I call the weavers. And weavers are kind of like healers. They work very similar to healers. Healers tend to work on individuals, whether that's animal or plant or human or even other species. They focus on an individual system, usually. There are other types of healing, of course, but generally speaking, we think of healers as someone that's repairing, boosting, elevating, soothing, calming, re-energizing, things that have gone perhaps wrong or out of balance in individual systems. Well, weavers can do those very same things for large scale systems, planetary systems, community systems, grids, etheric thought systems. We have an avenue that can be utilized to help correct inappropriate division. That is not to say that we want to interfere with lawful division that is based on resonance and alignment. But we have ways to repair jagged edges that have been torn and do not need to stay torn, do not need to stay separate. We have ways to work with this. Very powerful, etheric mechanisms that we can call upon and use for this purpose. Let's talk about the invasion, whether that's into your freedoms or whether that's into your personal space. That idea of invasion or intrusion into your sovereignty. We have choices here. We have power here. Magical power. Shielding. There are all kinds of ways to set up filters and shields that work. We can ask for help with this if we are so inclined to ask other types of beings who love and care for us and are supportive of the most benevolent timelines. We can ask for their help too. There is a multitude of ways that we can access and personally affect our personal sovereignty and the space that we surround ourselves with so that those other things cannot intrude and cannot invade. It might take some practice, it might take some diligence, it might take some experimentation, but I know it can be done. I've seen the effects. I have seen the truth of these things that I'm sharing with you today. Each one of you can do this. Each one of you has these powers. And what about this gradual, the hits we take that are lowering our frequency or interfering with our vibrations? All of us have the power to counteract this. All of us do. Those things of darkness cannot stand in light. They cannot stand in truth. They cannot continue to resonate and grow and overcome and overtake us if we present a counterbalance to those things and let that light grow and expand instead. We have power over our individual space. Do not let any of the current discouraging messages ever fool you into thinking you do not have this power. That's part of the agenda, so to speak, right? Is to fool us, is to get us doubting our own power that we truly have. All of these things can be overcome right now, starting today, a little at a time. Wherever the most interest you have is, that's where you should begin. Follow your own spark. Follow your own interest. Follow the thing that is tugging at you the most. Follow what is bothering you the most. And think of the counteraction to that. Think of what counters it. Think of what would block it, what would diminish it. Because you have the power to invent, imagine, intuit, and create that counteraction. You can set that up. Even if you are not in the place to set that up in your physical space, you are able to set that up in your etheric space. And I guarantee that the more you work there, and the more you align with the boundaries and the space you set up etherically, the more it will come into your 3D world. And so I wanted to share this message with you because we are getting bombarded. We are in some very intense times. And I don't think it's really healthy to stand around and deny that. I think we need to admit it. Because the first step in empowering ourselves in times like this is to admit that we need to, is to admit, hey, I'm not as powerful as I need to be because things are hitting me. And you take this realistic viewpoint, and then we start working with it. And we can turn this around in our own lives, and then we can meet each other. And as we do this work, it's connecting through this etheric network of listeners and other magical people, others who are doing the spiritual work, others on this wavelength, others who are communicating with beings that are trying to help us and support us. We start aligning more and more and more with that enormous network that's out there for us to become a part of. And that will start feeding back into you as well. That will start giving you ideas and inspiration and strength that you didn't even know you had. That does seem to come from outside of you. So this all interconnects. Our job is to take the first step. Our job is to make the first movement towards improvement. You take those first steps and you'll know what to do on the next one and the next one and the next one. That's how it works. Sometimes we have to head into the dark. Sometimes we have to be a little bit blind, step off with faith, and the light starts shining a little brighter the farther we go. I'm so excited to be taking this journey with you. I've said it in many podcasts, and I so truly feel I'm in touch with many of you out there, and I feel your strength. And I take that for myself. I utilize this network for myself. I feel love towards you, and I feel your love back. And this is not to be downplayed. This is another very powerful tool we all have. And we're going to discuss that specifically in a podcast coming up shortly, very soon. For today, I leave you with this message. And I hope that each one of you will review this message and listen and follow your intuition. Just take the first steps. Don't try to do it all at once. You don't have to eat the whole pie. Just take the first bite. That's what we all have to do, the first bite. One step at a time. We can do it. Sending much love to you. I know these things to be true. I value each and every one of you. And I will say goodbye for now.